a pregnant woman can lose nearly half her circulating blood volume, like up to 1,500 milliliters of blood, before her blood pressure even begins to drop.
Yeah, her body will literally mask severe life-threatening trauma just to keep functioning.
It's wild.
Yeah.
That is how intense the physiological adaptations of pregnancy are. So welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at that razor-thin line between those incredible biological adaptations and high-stakes pathology.
It really is a delicate balance. And for you listening, as a nursing student, we are doing a deep dive specifically into Chapter 7 of Davis Advantage for Maternal Newborn Nursing.
Right. Focusing strictly on complications of pregnancy.
Exactly. The whole clinical focus here is recognizing when normal anatomy and physiology get pushed too far and how your astute nursing assessments lead directly to life-saving interventions for both the mom and the baby.
No stress. Right. Just clear connections today. Think of this as a supportive one-on-one tutoring session. So let's start where the chapter starts, identifying risk.
Yeah, a high-risk pregnancy is fundamentally one that threatens the health or life of the mother or the fetus.
Right. And Box 7.1 details the common clinical risk factors, which, they make sense. Existing health conditions, a history of prior complications, carrying multiples, or age.
Specifically being 18 or younger or older than 35. But risk goes far beyond a patient's medical chart.
Oh, absolutely.
We really have to look at the social determinants of health, and specifically the reality of birth equity, because you just cannot separate clinical outcomes from the lived environment.
Right. And the text talks about this through the concept of toxic stress, right?
Yes. When a person faces chronic, severe adversity like systemic inequity, their body is constantly flooded with dangerous levels of stress hormones like cortisol and catecholamines.
Which leads to what researchers call weathering. I mean, the best way I can picture this for you listening is imagine a house built in a brutally severe climate.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, if the foundation starts to crack, you don't blame the house. You look at the chronic environmental stress. The freezing, the thawing, the relentless wind that's been wearing down the structure over time.
Exactly. That constant assault of inequity literally wears down a person's physiological reserves. And, the statistics reflect this structural failure.
Yeah, the text notes the preterm birth rate for Black women is like 50% higher than for white women.
It's a massive variance.
Yeah.
So to combat this, healthcare systems implement what are called patient safety bundles.
Right, but how does a nurse actually implement those bundles on the floor?
Well, they're evidence-based best practices designed to standardize care. By having a universal protocol-driven response to obstetric emergencies, you remove the variation in care that leaves room for implicit bias to creep in.
That makes total sense.
But standardizing the emergency response doesn't mean treating the patient like a number. A critical component of nursing care here is providing highly individualized, patient-centered support.
Because you're actively assessing their emotional distress too, right?
Right. Their coping mechanisms and the very real threats to self-esteem that come with a high-risk diagnosis.
It's really treating the whole person. So moving into the text order, one of the most common symptoms requiring your clinical judgment is premature contractions.
Preterm labor, or PTO. This is defined as regular uterine contractions that actually cause cervical change before 37 weeks.
And managing that requires some really precise pharmacology. We use medications called tocolytics to delay delivery.
But, buying time is only half the battle. The single most beneficial intervention for a patient facing preterm birth is the administration of antenatal corticosteroids.
Specifically medications like betamethasone, right?
Exactly. And these are given within a very specific window between 24 and 34 weeks of gestation.
To accelerate fetal lung maturity and prevent respiratory distress syndrome. But how does a steroid actually mature the lungs, like mechanically?
Good question. It mimics the natural cortisol surge that usually happens right before a full-term birth. The betamethasone crosses the placenta and stimulates the type 2 pneumocytes in the fetal lungs.
Okay.
And that makes them start producing surfactant. Surfactant is that soapy substance that keeps the tiny air sacs from collapsing every time the baby exhales. Without it, breathing is incredibly difficult.
Okay, that makes perfect physiological sense. But here is where I've always had a bit of confusion, and I'm sure some listeners do too. Magnesium sulfate is also listed here for preterm birth.
Yes, it is heavily utilized.
Wait, I thought magnesium was for blood pressure or preventing seizures and preeclampsia. Why are we giving it if the baby is just coming early?
You're bringing up a really vital distinction. It is the exact same medication, but the clinical indication changes entirely based on gestational age.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when you give magnesium sulfate before 7 weeks in the context of preterm labor, its primary purpose is fetal neuroprotection.
Neuroprotection, meaning it protects the premature baby's brain.
Yes. Extreme prematurity puts the fetal brain at high risk for hemorrhage and damage. Magnesium sulfate stabilizes cerebral blood flow, and it prevents excitotoxicity in the brain, significantly reducing the risk of cerebral palsy.
Okay, so it serves dual purposes depending on the context. Let's look at the chapter's care plan for a patient. They use the name Mallory, who is receiving magnesium sulfate for PTL.
Right, for her initial loading dose.
Yeah, she's likely going to feel incredibly hot, flushed, and sweaty.
And for you assessing her, those are completely expected reactions to the vasodilation caused by the initial bolus. She'll also probably feel very lethargic.
So what's the primary nursing priority there?
Because it's such a potent medication, strict continuous monitoring, you have to measure her intake and output meticulously to prevent fluid overload. Her lungs are highly susceptible to that during this time.
Got it. Now, contractions are one trigger for preterm birth, but the other major one is premature rupture of membranes, or PROM, and if it's before 37 weeks, PPROM.
Right, and the immediate consequence is that the sterile protective barrier surrounding the fetus is just gone.
So the nursing priority pivots instantly. You're no longer just monitoring contractions. You are actively hunting for signs of infection.
Specifically choriamnionitis. You're looking for maternal fever, foul-smelling vaginal fluid, and severe uterine tenderness.
But the very first sign is often fetal tachycardia, isn't it?
Yes. The baby's metabolic rate spikes as the mom's temperature rises, or just as the infection sets in. An elevated fetal heart rate is a massive red flag.
Okay, so sometimes the issue isn't early contractions or broken water. Sometimes it's the physical structure of the reproductive system struggling to carry the load.
Like with cervical insufficiency. This is a painless dilation of the cervix without any uterine contractions.
The structural integrity just isn't strong enough.
Exactly. So the medical management is a surgical intervention called a cerclage. They place a purse string stitch around the cervix to reinforce it and keep it closed.
Another scenario that pushes structural capacity to the absolute limit is multiple gestation.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether it's monozygotic twins, so identical from one egg, or dizygotic fraternal twins from 2 eggs, the physical toll is immense. Multiples exaggerate every single normal physiological change of pregnancy.
To put that in perspective, in a normal singleton pregnancy, maternal blood volume increases by 40 to 50%. With multiples, that volume increases by an additional 500 milliliters.
That's a huge amount of extra fluid.
And the physical weight. The uterine contents alone can weigh over 20 pounds.
I always compare it to running a car engine entirely in the red zone. Everything is working overtime. The engine is burning hotter, the RPMs are maxed out.
And the structural chassis is groaning under the weight.
Right. That 20-pound uterus pushes the diaphragm upward, displacing the lungs and causing severe dyspnea, or shortness of breath.
And because the uterine muscle fibers are stretched to their absolute maximum, the uterus becomes highly irritable, which makes preterm labor incredibly common.
Plus, that excessive stretch increases the risk for postpartum hemorrhage, because an overstretched muscle struggles to clamp down after delivery.
That red zone engine analogy applies perfectly to the metabolic and hormonal systems, too. When hormones surge past normal limits, you get conditions like hyperemesis gravidarum.
And we should differentiate that from standard morning sickness. Normal nausea is awful, but hyperemesis crosses into systemic physiological impact.
Right. This is vomiting so severe the patient loses 5% or more of their pre-pregnancy body weight. They become severely dehydrated and enter starvation ketosis.
Because they can't keep glucose down, right? So their cells burn fat for energy.
Exactly, releasing ketones into the blood. So nursing care shifts to IV hydration and aggressive electrolyte replacement.
Another severe complication from hormonal overload is intrahepatic cholestasis of pregnancy, or ICP.
This is a specific liver disorder. The normal flow of bile is disrupted, so bile salts accumulate in the bloodstream and deposit in the skin.
And the hallmark sign here is intense, generalized itching pruritus, especially on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. And notably, without a rash.
The itching is excruciating for the mom, but the real danger is to the fetus. Bile acids are highly toxic.
Right. ICP carries a huge risk of sudden fetal death.
Yes, and because it's so unpredictable, medical management requires intense surveillance. We're talking twice-weekly non-stress testing to monitor fetal well-being until delivery.
Which brings us to another major metabolic challenge: diabetes in pregnancy. A patient might have pregestational diabetes, or they might develop gestational diabetes, GDM.
The pathophysiology here is so fascinating. The placenta essentially acts as an endocrine organ. It produces hormones like human chorionic somatomatropin, or HCS.
And HCS actively desensitizes the mother's cells to her own insulin.
Because the placenta is prioritizing the fetus. By creating maternal insulin resistance, it ensures glucose stays in the mom's bloodstream so it can cross over to the baby.
So the placenta is actively fighting the mom's insulin. What happens if her pancreas just can't keep up with that resistance?
That is exactly what results in gestational diabetes. The maternal pancreas just cannot overcome the placenta's blockade.
And the margin for error is so tight. Let's break down Table 7.3, the target blood glucose values.
Yes, fasting should be 95 milligrams per deciliter or lower.
1 hour post-meal should be 140 or less.
And 2 hours post-meal needs to be 120 or less.
We really have to look at the cause and effect here. Maternal hyperglycemia means extra sugar is constantly crossing the placenta, but the mom's insulin is too large to cross.
So the baby's tiny pancreas has to kick into overdrive, producing massive amounts of its own insulin to handle the sugar.
And fetal hyperinsulinemia acts like a growth hormone, right?
Exactly. It leads directly to macrosomia, a very large baby, often over 4,000 grams, which significantly increases the risk of birth trauma, like shoulder dystocia,
where the shoulders get stuck. And there's that secondary effect too. All that fetal insulin interferes with surfactant production.
Right. So maternal high blood sugar leads to a massive baby that somehow still has premature, underdeveloped lungs.
It's a cascading failure. And we see that exact same kind of overload in the cardiovascular system with hypertensive disorders.
For sure. The classifications are based on timing. Chronic hypertension is before 20 wints. Gestational hypertension is new onset after 20 weeks.
But preeclampsia is a whole different syndrome. It's hypertension after 20 weeks plus proteinuria protein in the urine or systemic features.
The pathophysiology is vital here. Normal pregnancy involves vasodilation to handle the blood volume, but preeclampsia is driven by severe vasospasm and endothelial damage.
I always compare it to a garden hose. If you clamp down the nozzle, the pressure builds dangerously high, damaging the internal lining of the vessels all over the body.
That's perfect. The kidneys are damaged, so they leak protein. The liver is deprived of blood, causing upper quadrant pain. The brain's vessels spasm, causing headaches.
And with severe features, the blood pressure hits 160 over 110 or higher, which is a clinical emergency that has to be treated within 60 minutes to prevent stroke.
And that severe vascular damage often manifests as HELLP syndrome.
Let's break down HELLP. Hemolysis, elevated liver enzymes, and low platelets.
Right. Hemolysis because the red blood cells are physically sheared apart, forcing their way through spasming vessels. Liver enzymes elevate from lack of oxygenated blood.
And platelets drop because the body is consuming its entire supply trying to patch up the widespread vascular damage.
And as pressure builds in the brain, the ultimate danger is eclampsia, the onset of seizures. So we return to magnesium sulfate.
As a central nervous system depressant this time.
Exactly, to raise the seizure threshold. But because we're depressing the CNS, you have to watch for toxicity. The first sign is often the loss of deep tendon reflexes, or DTRs.
And you have to assess the respiratory rate, right? It must be greater than 12, or they stop breathing.
Yes. And monitor urine output. It has to be greater than 30 milliliters per hour, because magnesium is cleared through the kidneys. If output drops, it reaches fatal levels incredibly fast.
And if you see toxicity, you explicitly stop the infusion and give the antidote. Calcium gluconate.
Every time.
Now, with all this vascular damage, hemorrhagic emergencies often follow. Let's compare the two major third trimester ones, placenta previa and placental abruption.
Previa is when the placenta covers the cervix. The classic presentation is painless, bright red bleeding.
And the bold print safety rule: never do a sterile vaginal exam. If your fingers disrupt that placenta, you can trigger a catastrophic hemorrhage in seconds.
Exactly. Now, abruption is the premature separation of the placenta from the uterine wall. That presents as painful, dark red bleeding with a rigid, board-like abdomen.
Which cuts off oxygen to the fetus instantly. This brings us back to trauma, and that stat from the intro. Because blood volume increases by 50%, a mom can lose up to 40% of her blood volume.
1,500 milliliters.
Yeah, before showing vital sign changes of hypovolemic shock.
Because her body aggressively shuns blood away from the uterus to protect her own brain. So, fetal distress, fetal tachycardia is often the very first sign of maternal hemodynamic compromise.
The fetal monitor alerts you before the blood pressure cuff does. It's incredible. Let's quickly shift to external invaders. The text covers torch infections, STIs, and group B strep, or GBS.
Right, GBS is screened for prenatally. If positive, the intervention is IV antibiotics during labor to prevent neonatal sepsis.
And respiratory viruses, like COVID-19, carry higher risks because the diaphragm is displaced and oxygen demand is higher.
Exactly, and pregestational conditions are tested too. For cardiac disease, maternal cardiac output peaks at 28 to 32 weeks.
Making that the most dangerous time for a patient with underlying heart disease.
And pregnancy is naturally a hypercoagulable state to prevent bleeding at birth.
But obesity compounds that risk, increasing venous stasis and the chance of a thromboembolism, or VTE.
Finally, diagnosing things like thyroid disorders is hard because hyperthyroidism, symptoms like heat intolerance, and tachycardia mimic normal pregnancy.
Right. It's just an incredible balancing act. And your astute nursing observation is what prevents morbidity.
It really is the front line.
And I want to leave you, the listener, with a provocative thought from the text's birth equity section. Epigenetics. The toxic stress and complications a mother endures don't just affect this pregnancy.
They actually alter fetal gene expression.
Yes. Conferring a risk for compromised health upon that infant throughout their entire life. Obstetric nursing isn't just about safe delivery. It's about multi-generational health.
It really is.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us. From all of us on the Last Minute Lecture team, you have what it takes to master this material, and you're going to be an incredible nurse.